They say a mother's proudest moment is watching her daughter walk down the aisle, and I believed that with all my heart. The morning of Emily's wedding was bathed in sunlight, the kind that dances through curtains like a silent blessing. The air smelled like gardenias and champagne. I helped her into her dress, ivory lace with soft, flowing sleeves, and when she turned to look at me, eyes teary, my heart almost burst. Emily was my only child. I raised her mostly on my own, even though Richard was physically there, or at least he used to be. The past few years, something shifted. He said work was demanding more late nights, more business trips. I wanted to believe him. I did believe him. You don't spend 26 years with someone without giving them the benefit of the doubt. But there were moments I couldn't ignore: the unfamiliar perfume on his shirts, the credit card charges that didn't match his explanations, the way he avoided looking at me when I brought up our anniversary. Still, today wasn't about me. It was about Emily. I promised myself I would push every doubt to the side, smile, and be the mother she deserved on her special day. Richard looked sharp in his tux, calm and collected like always. He even kissed my cheek in front of everyone like everything was fine. I told myself not to ruin it. Whatever storm might be brewing, I'd deal with it later. But as I stood in the church watching the guests fill the pews, I had the strangest feeling in my chest. Like something was off, like someone had opened a window in the dead of winter, and I just couldn't find where the cold was coming from. I shook it off, adjusted my dress, and took my place beside Richard at the front row. The music started. The doors opened. Emily stepped in, radiant and glowing. Everyone gasped in awe. I felt tears well up again this time from pride. But as I glanced at Richard, I saw a flicker in his eyes. Not joy, not pride. Guilt. At the time, I didn't know what it meant. I just knew something was coming. Something I wasn't ready for. And I was right. The ceremony was flawless. Vows were exchanged. Rings were slipped onto trembling fingers. Emily's voice cracked slightly when she said, "I do," and everyone let out a soft, collective sigh. I reached for Richard's hand instinctively. He let me hold it, but there was no warmth. Just skin and bone, just cold. Still, I smiled for Emily. At the reception, laughter echoed through the hall. Glasses clinked, music swelled. Emily and her new husband, Michael, twirled on the dance floor like they were the only two people in the universe. I watched them with pride and just the tiniest sliver of envy. That's when Richard leaned toward me. We were sitting at the head table, pretending to be the picture of a happy couple. Guests were everywhere. Cameras flashed. Then his breath brushed my ear, and I'll never forget the exact words. "After tonight, I'm leaving. I'm in love with someone else." The music kept playing. People kept laughing, but I froze. I turned slowly, thinking I must have heard him wrong. He stared ahead like he hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of my soul. I whispered, What are you talking about?" He didn't blink. I didn't want to ruin Emily's day. I'll explain everything later. Explain. Explain what? That he had planned this, that while I was picking out centerpieces and booking florists, he was planning his escape, that while I was steaming Emily's veil, he was kissing another woman. The lights were too bright. My skin felt too tight. My heartbeat roared in my ears. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my wine in his face, but I couldn't. Not here. Not now. Not in front of Emily. So I sat there, stiff smiling at guests who passed by, telling us how beautiful everything was, how happy we all looked, how lucky I was to have such a wonderful family. And inside, something in me started to break quietly, piece by piece. I excused myself to the restroom, barely making it through the crowd without collapsing. I stared at my reflection, trying to find the woman I used to be. He was leaving me. Tonight. And the worst part, I still had no idea who he was leaving me for. But I was about to find out in the most humiliating way imaginable. I returned to the table with a forced smile and trembling hands, just in time for the speeches. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible fist. Richard sat beside me, cool and composed, as if he hadn't just unraveled 26 years of marriage with one whisper. Emily stood and raised her glass to thank everyone. She looked so radiant, so impossibly happy, I clapped along with everyone else, swallowing the scream building in my throat. How could he do this today, on her day? Then the room went quiet. The doors to the reception hall opened, and in walked a woman no one recognized. At first, she didn't look like much mid-30s, confident, walk-long red coat that clung to her like a statement. She paused at the entrance, scanning the crowd until her eyes landed on our table, on Richard. He went pale, and that's when I knew this was her. The woman he was leaving me for. My chest tightened, but then something strange happened. The woman didn't walk to our table. She walked past it right up to Emily. Everyone turned. Confused murmurs swept through the room. She handed Emily a small envelope, whispered something into her ear, then without another word turned and walked straight out of the hall like a ghost. Emily looked stunned. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. I rose instinctively, hard in my throat, just as she gasped loud and sharp. Inside was a series of printed photos of Richard and that woman at a cabin on a beach in a hotel hallway. Emily's face crumbled. Her groom leaned in, confused, then furious. I rushed to her side, but she shoved the photos into my hands. Then she said the words, "I'll never forget." That's not just his mistress. That's my former college roommate, my maid of honor. She was supposed to be here today. The room exploded in whispers. I turned to Richard, expecting him to deny everything. He didn't. He just stood there, cornered, humiliated, exposed in front of hundreds of people. No more secrets, no more lies, just the ugly, pathetic truth laid bare for everyone to see. Emily ran out. Michael followed, and I stood there frozen between a life that had just shattered and a new one I hadn't chosen but would be forced to begin. And yet the worst was still to come, because the betrayal didn't stop with her. No, there was one more lie buried even deeper, and it was about to rise to the surface. 2 months after the wedding disaster, I was living in a different house, sleeping in a different bed, and waking up to a different life, one I never asked for. Richard had officially filed for divorce. He didn't even try to fight for anything. Not the house, not the savings, not even the family photos I offered to box up. It was like he couldn't wait to erase me. And honestly, after what he did, I didn't care. Or at least I thought I didn't. Then I got a call from a woman I didn't know. She sounded nervous. Shaky, she asked me if I was Richard's first wife. My heart dropped. "I'm his current wife," I said quietly. Silence. Then she whispered, "That's what I was afraid of." That's when everything unraveled. She wasn't the red-haired woman from the wedding. She was someone else, someone I had never met. And she wasn't just calling to ask about Richard. She was calling to warn me. He had married her too, in a small town 2 states over, 6 years ago. He used a different last name, but the same face, the same fake charm, the same promises. And he had drained her savings too, every penny. I didn't want to believe her. I couldn't. I hung up, shaking. But something in her voice, it wouldn't let me rest. So I started digging marriage records, financial accounts, out-of-town business trips that now looked more like escapes, and what I found made my stomach turn. There wasn't just one other woman. There were 3. 3 legal marriages, all overlapping, all with women like me. Trusting, loyal, blind. He hadn't just cheated. He had lived an entirely separate life behind my back, multiple lives. And suddenly everything made sense. Why he always insisted on handling the taxes. Why he never wanted a joint bank account. Why he would disappear for conferences that somehow never had photos or receipts. My husband wasn't just a liar. He was a con artist. And his entire second act, the one where he left me for another woman, was just a way to slip away quietly before I found out the truth. But he underestimated me, because now I had names, dates, evidence. And I wasn't just going to protect myself. I was going to make sure no other woman ever fell into his trap again. The courtroom felt colder than it should have. Maybe it was the sterile air, or maybe it was knowing that the man sitting just 20 feet away, the man I'd shared a bed, a life, a daughter with, was a stranger wearing my husband's face. Richard barely looked at me. He sat with his lawyer, arms crossed, jaw clenched as if he was the victim. I had filed for fraud, bigamy, and financial misconduct. The other women had joined me. 3 of us side by side like a wall he never thought would form. We had receipts, marriage certificates, bank statements, airline logs. But the defense kept insisting there was no malicious intent, that it was all a series of misunderstandings, until the judge called a surprise witness. Call to the stand, Thomas Delaney. I froze. That name, I'd heard it once years ago, a childhood friend of Richard's. Someone he claimed had died in college. But the man who walked up to the stand was very much alive. Late 40s, gray at the temples, but confident. He took the oath, sat down and looked directly at Richard. And then he told us everything. I met Richard Briggs under a different name. Eric Langston 20 years ago at a financial conference Thomas began. He told me he was running a project for military wives and wanted my help moving funds through real estate investments. He paused, looked at the judge. It took me a year to realize it was a shell game, a scam. He used fake wives to secure loans, then vanished with the cash. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. I confronted him. He threatened my family. So I stayed quiet, but when I saw the news about this case, I knew I had to come forward. My hands were shaking. Richard didn't even flinch. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Briggs, are you prepared to respond to this testimony? For the first time in the entire trial, Richard stood up, but not to defend himself. He looked at me, just me. I never meant to hurt you, he said softly. But you weren't supposed to find out. None of you were. And just like that, it was all out. Not just infidelity, not just betrayal. It was planned, premeditated, and we'd all been pawns. But now for the first time, the pieces were turning against him, and justice was finally within reach. They say time heals everything, but in my case, time only revealed more. 6 months had passed since the courtroom showdown. Richard was out on bail, awaiting sentencing. But he wasn't exactly laying low. I heard rumors. He had proposed to someone new, a younger woman from Arizona, a nurse apparently. He told her his ex-wives were crazy, that we'd fabricated everything out of jealousy and revenge. She believed him just like we all once did. I couldn't stop thinking about her. I didn't know her name, but I knew the pattern. So, when I heard whispers that Richard was planning a 4th wedding, something inside me snapped. I called the other women. We called our lawyers, then we called someone else. The FBI. Turns out, Richard's financial scams cross state lines and identities. He'd been under quiet surveillance for months, but they didn't have a solid location until now. We gave them everything. The venue, the date, the guest list, even his favorite champagne brand, because of course he had requested it in advance. And on the day of his beautiful beachside ceremony, as the sun hit its golden hour and the violinist began to play, we waited. I stayed hidden, watching from a distance behind a hedge. He stood at the altar, smug and polished in a white tuxedo, holding the hand of a girl who looked barely old enough to rent a car. The guests stood. The minister began to speak. Then the sirens. Black SUVs tore down the road. Tires screeched. Doors flew open. FBI, nobody move. The bride screamed. Guests scattered. Richard froze his hand, still holding hers, eyes locked on the agents closing in. I'll never forget the look on his face. Not fear, not even regret. It was shock, as if he never thought the game would actually catch up to him. They cuffed him at the altar, right in front of the woman he planned to ruin next. As they dragged him toward the car, he looked around wildly, and then for a split second, he saw me. He didn't say anything, but I did. I stepped forward just enough so he'd hear me. You almost got away. And then, just like that, the door slammed shut. The sirens wailed again, and Richard Briggs, the man I once married, was gone. This time for good. The months that followed Richard's arrest were nothing short of a roller coaster. People said it would get easier, but I didn't feel the ease. I felt empty, lost, and for a while I wondered if I'd ever truly get back to the woman I was before him. There were the legal battles, of course, court dates, lawyers, paperwork, endless interviews with the FBI. But more than that, there was the aftermath. The whispers from old friends. The shock from my daughter who couldn't understand why her father, the man who'd once been her hero, had become a stranger in the blink of an eye. For weeks, I found myself going through the motions. I'd wake up dressed for the day, sit in meetings, signed documents, all while thinking, how did I let this happen? How would I let my life fall into the hands of someone so deceitful, so unworthy? But then one afternoon, something shifted. I was sitting at a cafe working through my thoughts. As I had countless times before, I didn't expect to meet anyone. Certainly not someone who would change everything. It was a woman I'd never seen before, sitting alone across from me. Her name was Grace, and she had a smile that reminded me of who I used to be, the version of me before Richard's lies had taken hold. We talked for hours about life, about pain, about the things we'd survived. It wasn't just a conversation. It felt like a mirror. She listened without judgment, her words like a balm to a soul that had been bruised for too long. "You're not defined by him," she said, a soft yet powerful conviction in her voice. "You lost someone who didn't deserve you, but you have so much ahead of you, so much that's yours to claim." For the first time in months, I felt something stir within me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pity, it was hope. After that day, I started making changes. I took time for myself, really took it without guilt. I focused on my career, my passions, and my daughter. We rebuilt our lives, slowly, piece by piece, without the shadow of Richard hanging over us. And I found that as I let go of him, I started to reclaim parts of myself that had been buried. The dreams I had once abandoned for his dreams. The self-worth I had let him erase. The confidence I thought was lost forever. I won't say it was easy. There were days when the memories of Richard's betrayal stung so deeply, I thought I couldn't breathe, but I survived. And in that survival, I rediscovered a truth I had long forgotten. I am enough. I didn't need a man who lied, manipulated, and took from me to be whole. I had always been whole. My daughter, seeing the transformation, smiled for the first time in months. I had become something more than just a woman scorned. I had become myself again. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. There's a saying that sometimes the universe has a way of showing you exactly who people are at the most unexpected moments. And on that day, my daughter's wedding, a day meant to be filled with joy and celebration, Richard showed his true colors. It was cruel. It was heart-wrenching. But looking back now, I can see it for what it truly was, a gift. Because the truth was, he wasn't just leaving me that day. He was freeing me. He was giving me the final push I needed to let go of someone who had never truly valued me. Someone who had lied, manipulated, and deceived me for years, all while convincing me I wasn't enough. But in the cruelest, most public way, he exposed himself for what he truly was, a man who had no respect, no love, and no integrity. And in that moment, I realized that the best thing he ever did for me was reveal his true face. At first, the pain was unbearable, but with time, I understood that he had done me a favor. The betrayal was a wake-up call. It was the moment I realized I deserved better. When someone is so cruel to leave you during your most vulnerable moment, when they show no remorse, no empathy, they do you a favor. They show you the truth, and they let you see them for who they really are. And for that, I am grateful. Because in the end, I walked away, stronger, wiser, and more in control of my life than I had ever been before.